أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Dr. Suzy Ismail from Cornerstone, and I am happy to be with you again on this journey of Ramadan resilience, where we are better understanding our mental, emotional, social, and relational health and wellness. So far we've talked a lot about anxiety, we've talked about fear, we've talked about our response to fear. But it's important for us to return back to that verse in the Quran, that verse 155 in Surah Al-Baqarah, where we were looking at how Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, reminds us that surely we will be tested. And we said that the first test that Allah Azza wa Jal addresses in that verse is the test of al-khawf, of fear. But Allah Azza wa Jal also tells us in that verse that we will be tested with something of hunger, al-ju'. And when we think of hunger, a lot of times we think of the physical manifestation of hunger. We may have, full plates at every meal. We may have full bellies, and we may not be suffering from a hunger that is physically induced. But there are other types of hunger that we may experience in our lifetime. And it's hunger of an emotional perspective. We could hunger for affection. We could hunger for attention. We could hunger for connection. Right? And all of these are different forms of hunger where our body, our mind, our soul sometimes feels starved. And one of the most difficult elements of hunger that we can experience is the hunger for a spiritual connection. The hunger where we feel like we want to connect with Allah Azza wa Jal, but we may be struggling. And that struggle sometimes may make it difficult. So for example, we had mentioned before that sometimes when someone struggles with a mental health difficulty, the response immediately may be pray 2 rak'ahs, or if you pray more, then you're going to feel better. It's because you're not praying enough. And yet the person who is struggling with depression may be in such a dark state where it's difficult for them to get out of bed to even make wudu, where it's difficult for them to be able to clear their mind enough to be able to actually act upon that act of worship. And they may know that, if I could pray, I might feel better, but it's so hard to get to that point. And as a community, sometimes we will, derail the person who is struggling because maybe they are able to pray only one prayer in the day. And we may respond to that and say, well, clearly you're not praying all your prayers, and that's why you're depressed. And we need to be able to separate the two elements, because yes, hungering for a spiritual connection is a deep hunger that many of us feel, and sometimes we don't even identify it. We feel unsettled, we feel like we're disconnected, and we may not know why. Some people turn to substances to try to quell that hunger. Some people turn to distractions, scrolling through their social media feeds. Some people turn to television or music. But we know that all of these elements of the dunya are not necessarily going to quell that hunger for a spiritual connection. But we also want to be cognizant of the fact that when someone is struggling with a mental health struggle, that we want to be aware that despite them wanting to fill that void, wanting to feed that hunger of spiritual connection, they may still be trying to figure out how to do that. And so yes, we can encourage them and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to the masjid to pray Maghrib. Why don't you come with me? Because it may be more than just about the prayer. Maybe it is about the connection with someone else, and that will kind of open up the gateways for that spiritual connection. It may be about telling the person, hey, I'm going to read some Quran, or I'm going to listen to some Quran. Why don't you sit beside me? And sometimes during a mental health struggle, that's what's needed. It's needed just to feel that there's presence, that there is some kind of a connection with someone, and that connection with someone leads to the spiritual connection as well, the greatest connection of all, which is connecting to Allah Azza wa Jal. So, I challenge each of us to think this Ramadan about those people in our lives who may be struggling. Maybe we haven't seen them in the masjid for a while. Maybe we've never seen them in the masjid. Maybe they're our own family members. Maybe it's us ourselves, and we're struggling with a mental health struggle. I want us to challenge ourselves and to try to step outside that comfort zone, where if we know someone who may benefit from feeding that hunger of the spiritual connection, maybe we encourage them, maybe we guide them, maybe we bring them with us somewhere to the masjid, or we sit beside them and read Quran. But we don't denigrate them, we don't put them down. Even with ourselves, giving ourselves that space and that grace of recognizing that we may be going through a very, very difficult time, but that Allah Azza wa Jal loves the one who returns to Him. That even if we've gone very, very far away from Allah in our actions, in our reactions, in our responses, that there is always an opportunity to turn back to Him. And sometimes the greatest antidote in our struggles is that reliance upon Allah, recognizing that we've got this struggle, that it's difficult, it's not easy, but also knowing that we will get through it, inshallah. And I hope that throughout this Ramadan, we can all journey on this journey together, looking around in our own communities, looking around in our own families, asking ourselves, who might need that extra strength, that extra support, asking ourselves if we need it, and then trying to take that step to reach out and say, what avenues has Allah Azza wa Jal opened for me or provided for me to be able to get that help? So I hope that you'll join us in our next episode as we continue to look at the different types of hunger that we experience, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, and how we can tackle that hunger with strategies and techniques that can help us through it. Jazakum Allahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.